That was weird. All right. Well, we're rolling. What an opening to the podcast. Today we have on Pratik Patel. Is that how I say it?
Yeah, that's how you say it.
Okay, good. Just making sure. Give us your resume. You're a nutritionist. You're a strength coach. Where did you start? Give us the start to finish. A 5-minute job on how you came to where you are.
Yeah, so I was a grad teacher at K-State, getting a master's in kinesiology. And before that, I got credentialed as a dietitian, tried to work in a bunch of different places, couldn't really figure anything out. Wanted to work with athletes, so figured getting a master's in kin and looking at the strength side might help. So grad taught at K-State, worked with the men's basketball team, doing just random nutrition stuff for them for a couple of years under Scott Greenewalt, who's now at South Carolina with Coach Frank Martin. And aside from that was, doing a little bit of coaching, learning about weightlifting. So it's not just the nutrition part of it, just learning about the ins and outs of how strength and conditioning, kinesiology, they all intertwine. So I had a good 2 years there. And then in 2012, there were a lot of openings across the country at colleges hiring for like a full position or a coordinator. So interviewed at a bunch of different places, got a chance to work at Michigan State. So I was a sports dietitian, but only working with their athletes for about 10 to 20 hours a week. But aside from that, in the department that I was situated, I was doing some research projects, some adjunct teaching, and then with Joey Eisman, I don't know if you know him, but he does a lot of youth athlete development and long-term athlete development. Well, he created this program called Spartan Performance, where we would coach the mid-Michigan community of young athletes kind of holistically. So it was nutrition, mental skills, speed, strength, a variety of different things. So did that for a few years. Learned a lot from my time there, just in terms of working with Coach Manny's staff really closely and seeing things more from a strength and conditioning perspective. Wanted to continue on in that department, but the opportunity to progress wasn't there because the ADs were just like, look, one of them legit told me like, hey, sports nutrition is like sports psychology. It's a passing fad and it's going to go away. I mean, this was like in 2013. You can think about that now. Like, yeah, he was wrong.
Do you want to say his name?
No, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. No, but from there, I realized like having that opportunity to build something out, I was confident that I wanted to kind of oversee my own department to see if I can take my hand and build something out or contribute something that I thought was important. So, looked at openings that were around the country. Oregon had one for a director of sports nutrition position. So I'm like, shit, this is a place that's really well progressive with how they've implemented everything under the performance wing. So interviewed, got the job. And then now I went from being in this very small box in Michigan State to legitimately like being handed the keys to a Ferrari and they're like, okay, go drive it, figure it out. So the role was really great. So I was in charge of a department. I had to staff it. I had to come up with all the policies and procedures, integrate with all the different teams, integrate with sports medicine, integrate with strength and conditioning, sports science and performance. So from there, I was going from a place where I was really close to strength and conditioning to a place where I was very close with medicine and performance. So getting a chance to like see all this information, because again, you don't get taught the shit in college and school. You don't learn about sports science and monitoring and this and this until you've actually been put in those positions. So learn from a lot of really good people. We had a great first year there. I mean, went to the Rose Bowl, went to the Natty, got blown out by Ohio State, but it was a fun experience. And then, 2 years later, the football team does really poorly. So as you know, when a football team doesn't do well, your budget just goes down the toilet. So that football team had been basically keeping everybody else afloat and alive. There's a big misconception that Phil Knight just throws money at the athletic department. I'm like, that's not actually true. He helps build facilities and resources, but he doesn't throw into the departmental budget. That's like, if the department can't figure it out themselves, then that's their problem, not his. So it went through a hiring freeze. They got rid of the coaching staff. And for a lot of us, we were just waiting to see like, all right, are we going to be thrown under the bus too? But luckily it wasn't. But the direction that the department and the program was going wasn't something that I felt I could contribute to. And I felt like my skills were regressing like they had at the tail end of me at Michigan State. So a big piece of that was I felt that the strength and conditioning program wasn't up to par along the lines of what everybody else was bringing to the table. And a lot of the athletes recognized it and they were asking for help and this and that. And then in my head, I'm like, well, it's something that I think would be awesome to be able to do, tailor both of the two things that I've studied and learned and have implemented in the past to see like, could I do this at a specific level, whether it's pro, whether it's college, whatever. And that's where I heard in 2017, the Giants were looking to move on from their consultant to bring on somebody full-time, but they wanted somebody with a strength and conditioning background and experience to do a dual role. So I was like, man, this is like perfect timing. I'm ready to progress and move on in my career. Reached out to Aaron Wellman, said like, hey, this is who I am. I heard you guys have an opening. Do you want to talk? He said, yeah. So we talked on the phone, did a Skype interview, flew in, my in-person interview, got the job before I left. So, 2017, 18, 19, heading to 20, I had this dual role position where I was on Aaron's staff as a strength coach, but also overseeing everything nutrition related. So, everything nutrition, hydration, supplementation, helping the guys out with sleep and recovery, but also overseeing like the blood biomarker program that they had set up with Quest. So having my hand in a lot of different things, which is great because it wasn't just nutrition focused, which obviously every team needs because, energy demands, players need help, they need education. But for the most part, being a coach and being on the floor with them day to day and seeing exactly, like, I know what the loads are in the weight room, I know what the loads are on the field, I know what's going on with the injury report. It's allowing me to connect a lot of different dots to where my role allowed me to grow significantly, even more so than I thought, even more so than Aaron thought, to where going through those horrible seasons, 3 seasons in a row of the worst in the history of the organization wasn't as bad because I felt like I was contributing, not a lot, but a good amount in the role that I was given, which was great because I was growing quite a bit. But then, 2020 hits, Aaron gets an opportunity to go back home. Very happy for him, but it kind of changes the dynamic on the performance staff. And things just didn't go in the direction of where I felt like I could continue to grow with the organization. Obviously, what's good for the organization isn't good for individual people. I think they've got a really good head coach and coaching staff in place, but that meant that my role was changed to something that I didn't necessarily want to stay in. And just having gone through this whole, grind for 11, 12 years, I'm like, all right, do I want to continue doing something I don't have my full heart in, knowing that it's kind of a slap in the face, not only to the organization, but also to me. So I'd made the decision after training camp to say, look, I need to kind of just let me evaluate my life. I have this idea for a PhD in my head. If I stay with the team, it's going to be hard to accomplish. And, if I never really get the chance to at least try to, maybe go on my own, try things in my, individually, then, that all-encompassing team life just kind of swallows you up because they give you a nice salary, they give you benefits, and, they take care of you for the most part. So at the end of August, I called it quits just in terms of, I think my time right now with the organization is done. Let me go off on my own and see what I can do. So it kind of leads me to now.
And what is PhD now?
In? Yeah. What's the PhD?
So the PhD is through the University of South Queensland. It's looking at Kinanthropometry and physical characteristics of American college football players. So really, instead of just throwing guys into a bod pod or DEXA or having them stand on a BIA, it's like, let's actually dive deeper and looking into, what are these players actually made up of? So it's up to 30 measures on each individual player, looking at skin folds, bone breadth measures, calipers, height, limb length, things of that nature to really assess, all right, can we understand what their calculated skeletal mass is, how much muscle mass do they have, how much adipose mass, and then skin and residual, and actually get an idea of seeing like each guy position by position, and then overall as a whole, like what can you do with this guy based on what his limiting factors are. And for the most part, it's always going to be skeletal mass and some of these athletes that are older than 23, 24 that have already developed. And from that, you can get more of an idea to say you probably have an upper limit of how much mass you can put on a person because of how big their frame is. And we kind of know this. Like, if you look at somebody like Devontae Smith, won the Heisman. He's 170, 175 pounds, whatever he is. You look at him like that guy's tiny. He's got tiny shoulder breasts. He's got narrow waist. He's got tiny elbows and knees. And like, he doesn't need to put on a ton of mass, but he's functioning at a high level because he's optimized what's good for him. Now, everybody else in America is like, he's 6'1", he should be 205 pounds, 215 pounds. It's like, you put that much weight on that guy, do you think he's still going to be able to operate at the level, get in and out of his cuts, have the same type of speed, maintain those qualities over the duration of a season, SEC season, now NFL season? And the answer is no. And I think in the States, we just haven't done enough of our due diligence to really optimize, like, what do you do with a person once you get them? Instead of everybody needs to get bigger, stronger, faster. Yeah, that's important. But if people have already kind of hit their ceiling and you call yourself a strength coach who knows what to do with these people, like, how do you really take that person and make them even better based on what you have.
So these 30 different measurements, is this like a special combination that's been used before, or is this separate, validated different measurements that you've put together?
Yeah, I'm not the one that's validated and put it together. Some of it just comes from high-level ISAC measures, but it has been published and been validated in a lot of different types of sports like rugby and soccer. Previously in the past, even most recently in 2020, there was one that was done on, I think, South American youth soccer players in an academy. So all of it is kind of put together. It's been validated previously by ISAC, but it goes into a specific formula, which is what they call the 5-way fractionation, which breaks everything down into muscle, bone, skin, adipose, and then that residual mass. So from that, you kind of just, if you've been around a team enough for a specific sport, you start seeing trends amongst the position groups to say, okay, if we look at linemen, we know they're large, they're humongous. They need to generate as much power. They don't need to run 20 miles an hour. And there's not a lineman, in the NFL that's going to be running 20 miles an hour on any game day, maybe 9 to 12, if that, 10, 20 yards. So you want to make sure they're as strong as possible. They have as much muscle mass as possible, because that's what's going to dictate, a lot of their successes or failures at the line of scrimmage, as opposed to your skill players. Now, these guys are going to be hopefully hitting 20 to 22, 23 miles an hour, depending on what their role is with that team. And because they're doing that repeatedly, they're not going to be able to carry the massive amount of muscle mass on their frame to be able to get those accelerations 40 to 80 times a game, plus the decels. So you start seeing these trends of how much muscle mass per bone, like the muscle to bone ratio per position group, do you see? And what can you do when you optimize somebody? Because all these receivers are different. All these linemen are different. You have a DK Metcalf, and then you have a Devontae Smith, and then you have an Odell Beckham Jr. They're all completely different. So when a GM looks at a guy, is like, oh yeah, he needs to be 205, 210 pounds. It's like, well, he's a top 3 receiver at 192 to 195. Like, why do you want him to get bigger? Just because that's the mentality a lot of coaches and a lot of administrators have, because they just don't know the intricacies of it.
So it's great. I'm about to butt heads with you right away. So here's my issue with this, right? You have let's say an ankle to knee ratio that yields a specific tib and let's say gastroc, right? Like calf to shin muscle ratio. That's optimal for that, allegedly, right? That's essentially what's happening. Wellman gave the example of one of the guys that has really thick ankles and really thick knees and just massive quads and massive calves. That was with the Giants. So sure, to an extent, but that doesn't take into account testosterone. That doesn't take into account growth hormone. That doesn't take into account insulin. Any of these things that if any of these levels are not just optimized, but excessive, all of a sudden now you have this freak of nature that's able to put on even more mass and run even fucking faster. So I don't buy any of this shit. Like, I get there's an idea, but there are so many factors contributing to this, in my opinion, that to have a general understanding, but I know when one of my guys is super, super depressed and super low, his testosterone is low. And when he's getting way, way better, the testosterone naturally goes up. Does the muscle mass match that? Usually, yeah. So what's the relationship between all this?
Yeah, and I mean, you're always going to get outliers. So some people are just going to be able to put on more than anybody else. And that's why you see some guys able to grow faster, is because the internal environment's just that much better. They're not dealing with a lot of stuff that insulin just starts, peaking at the wrong times. They're not getting enough sleep. That's when, you do those tests on a daily basis to kind of monitor them to see, okay, what's going on? Why are they showing up with decreases in performance?
What a buzz.
Yeah. Weight isn't necessarily changing, so you can ask those questions to help them out. This is just more of a tool of just identifying where they're currently at and what they could potentially be based on the things that you can control. Now, all those other things, that's what makes a really good coach and somebody that knows the game inside and out to really help them navigate and mitigate some of those things. I think at a collegiate or high school level, some of this becomes a lot more evident because you have a lot of these coaches that are trying to get everybody just bigger, faster, stronger, as fast as possible. Oh yeah, so-and-so needs to gain 40 pounds over the course of a summer. And as we know that, is that really going to be possible? Yeah, the scale number can go up, but is he going to gain 40 pounds of mass? Like, obviously not. So when that happens, what actually happens to that guy, not only physiologically, but mentally? He's carrying all this weight that he hasn't been able to do before. And now he's getting thrown into a training camp. His loads are super high and he just can't keep up. So what does that do? Does that increase the risk for injury? Possibly, or potentially. Where did the mass actually get distributed? Well, some of it just depends on the frame that he has. If he has larger breadths at shoulder, knee, hip, those are the places that you're going to be able to put mass on a lot more. And sometimes we can see that from some of the measures that we've gotten on some guys. I think it's, it's not going to change the world or save everything. It just gives more insight to what you can actually do with the guy that you potentially have. And it's not going to try to cap somebody. Oh, you've already reached your genetic potential. Let's kind of stop you from there. But that's when you also, with all the other measures that teams are getting, they spend millions of dollars on monitoring tools, assessment tools to know how powerful these guys are, how strong are they. Is that actually making them better football players with what they're expected to do based on positional demands? Because yes, strength, speed, power, that all is very important. You want to maximize that as much as possible. But what happens when certain players aren't up to par with those numbers? Is it, like you said, something going on with the internal environment that we could look at? Absolutely, that plays a big role. But do you also have guys that, look, if you just look at him, like, he's not going to be the biggest guy. You have these linemen, you probably worked a lot. They struggle to even be 300 pounds. And there's a reason for that. They don't have the frame to actually carry it. So they've probably maybe maxed out on the amount of muscle mass that they can hold, especially if these guys are like 25, 26, 27, 28 and older. And then the GM's like, well, so, our left tackle we just picked up from so-and-so, yeah, he needs to be 317 pounds. And this guy is barely struggling 303. Like, he is killing himself to do that. You do a couple measures and you're like, dude, your skeletal mass is not that much. And you can kind of look at the guy and say, yeah, he's got those tiny little bird lineman legs. He doesn't have a very wide hip, so he can't put a ton of mass on. So just to put the number on the scale to increase, he's just eating a lot of BS calories. So then you can start seeing, yeah, the stomach starts bulging out. And not only visually, you can tell by the skin folds too. So it just kind of just brings another assessment technique into the frame to say, can we learn a little bit more about this guy to be a little bit smarter about our program?
So now there's one thing you said before, like if they put on 40 pounds, are they up for at risk for injury? And you said potentially. I'm saying fucking absolutely.
Yeah.
Like that. Yeah. It's a fucking weight vest. They're not putting 100% muscle on. And even if they do, in that time frame, the physiological adaptations that need to occur in order for you to sustain the force now you're capable of producing.
Yeah. Bone and joints and tendons can't handle it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely not. But over time, is it possible to outgrow these dimensions? Absolutely. Especially like these guys are genetic freaks. Now the other thing that I look at too, if you look at biomarkers like testosterone, for example, well, how about free testosterone? Now, someone may have shitty testosterone, but they have tremendous free testosterone. Now it equates to having really, really good testosterone because you're utilizing more that of even though the less of the number that you're working with, it's a greater percentage. So now it's like you're taking testosterone. So how do you, I can't sift through this stuff. How do you take that knowledge and then apply it to even any kind of recruiting? Or are you just saying, hey, skinny bones, there's only so much weight we're going to be able to put on this guy regardless? Are you taking biomarkers for hormone, like a hormone panel as well?
Yeah, the tough thing is, I mean, the college level, no one's really testing biomarkers. I don't know what the NCAA's stance on that is. In the NFL, you can only do it, but the results go specifically back to the players, so you don't get a chance to see it, and they have to give you consent. So because of all the hoops you have to jump through to be able to do that, more often than not, teams aren't going to add it to a panel because of the protection that they get from the CBA. So that, like you said, that becomes really difficult when making these decisions. But generally, when you get guys in the NFL, you're not going to make massive changes to their body comp unless they're just really messed up. They came through an underdeveloped type program, or they're very young where they still have a lot more room. Some of these guys are coming to the NFL at 20 years old. They haven't even hit 21. So there's so much room for potential, given that they may not have had the opportune programming in college, and or maybe they were just lazy, and finally they're going to kick it into gear because now they're in the NFL and now it's worth it. So you do bring up a really good question. I don't have the answer for that because I don't have the data. We've never been able to correlate both of it. And we can only take the subjective feelings of wellness that the players give us to say, oh, I'm constantly tired. I'm just not giving the same effort in the weight room. And this is what's going on at home. I'm stressed out. I'm not sleeping well. So we're in our heads like, and vitamin D's low. It's like, you probably are running a little bit lower. You're just, completely fried. What can we do to help you get those numbers up naturally?
I mean, I can see how you can protect a lot of guys with this, like what you said, a GM or someone thinking that the guy needs to gain 40 pounds, but you realistically can only gain 10 and hold it. But would there not be a limiter on it too if it was used for recruitment, because you're unsure of how someone's going to develop over the years? I mean, like you said, if they come in at 20, maybe by 28 they're a completely different body. I mean, how stable is the sort of correlation is there any stuff like from youth that you can sort of predict more or less based on their body type, how they're going to grow? Is there anything like that over a long period of time?
Longitudinally, in football, there's nothing. So it's hard to say. Like, you look at football athletes, they're a lot different. They're very similar to rugby and AFL, but you have a lot more that's been studied in those groups. Nothing necessarily longitudinally from youth to the college level, because it's almost impossible to be able to do that. You only have limited studies in college now. You have none in the NFL because you just can't publish the data because the players own all of it. You might be able to get something out of the combine, but even then it's more from the medical side, looking at things like vitamin D and increased risk of soft tissue injury. But that's a really good question. I think there's a lot to it, which if teams are going to invest in some type of assessment technique, and, the tough thing is you might only have these guys for a month, half a season, 1 year max. So you can't get the consistent measures on them. I mean, my first year was 17. My last year was 20. I think we only have 4 guys left on the roster from 17.
Yeah.
Which is, I mean, it's insane to think about. But I think the goal isn't to limit somebody. The goal is to optimize based on what the demands are. So if you're continually getting strength, speed, power output from the weight room and from the field, and you have these measures, and you're getting, 4 stacks jumps, so you kind of know where they're at, and you see what the performance is on game day, and you're getting the subjective feelings from the players. The players are going to know more than anybody. Like, hey, man, if I'm 3 pounds over, I don't feel good at all. And Mike, I'm sure you know what that's like. They know, and they should know, which is really good. But at the same time, we don't want to hold them back on limiting them on strength, but you also don't want to just keep chasing for the sake of chasing. There is a point to where you kind of just want to hit that sweet spot. And it's difficult in college because you just don't know how underdeveloped they are and what their potential is. But you want to be smart about it. Like in a training block, if you have 8 to 10 weeks, we're not going to try to shoot for 20 pounds of gain. We're like, okay, this guy has a sum of 6 of 80 post mass, which is higher than the positional average. So we want to cut that down. But we also know that his muscle to bone ratio is less than the positional average. He's got good size, and we want to increase that. So let's think about over the next 8 weeks, if we have good training, good nutrition compliance, and recovery, we want a 6-pound increase in muscle mass. We want a 3-pound decrease in fat mass. That means on his sum of 6, it's going to go down by this much. And overall, if we do girth measures, his muscle mass is going to increase by that much. And then you trial it, you see what the measures are, what the performance is in the weight room, on the field, subjectively, objectively. What do the coaches say? What does the players say? And then say, okay, let him get into competition with this newfound size, and then reevaluate it at the next opportunity. So whether it's back and continue to develop them, instead of, hey, we got this 235-pound tight end who's a freshman, he should be our left tackle. And you look at him like, this guy's got a tiny ass frame. We do not need to be putting 60 pounds on him over the next 6 months and then just throwing him to the wolves. Say, hey, now you're our starting left tackle.
Yeah. And even the fat to muscle ratio, is he higher than the mean? Is he lower than the mean? I mean, even that stuff. Look at Vince Wilfork. Come on. This motherfucker is a savage. What do you weigh? Fucking 400 pounds? You know what I mean? He's a massive, massive individual. What do you have? A 14-year career?
Oh, yeah.
Something like that. Guaranteed Hall of Famer. Like, this guy is incredible. And Brooker, this guy's belly was humongous, but he was a fucking powerhouse. The amount of visceral fat on this guy was insane. Like, it's almost like a guaranteed diabetes, right? Like, but completely ruins the mold on that. Are there outliers? Sure. But the entire NFL is loaded with outliers. So any of these statistics, I just don't even fucking know. Hogan, for example, when he was bigger than 205, he started getting Achilles issues. So he just had to fucking lose weight. That's all there was to it. His Achilles started getting too tight because the amount of load that they had. I mean, when he was with the Bills, I looked at some of their data, and I think they said that he was like, one day he was like 8,000 intensive yards in a practice. You know what I mean? Like something stupid like that. Like it's when he was a practice squad / special teams guy. Yeah.
And he take all the reps.
Yeah, every fucking rep. So hey, he feels better at this size, but he's bigger, stronger, faster when he's 217. So you just can't perform. Even though he was fastest at this, his performance at 205, it just is what it is. You got a guy like Quincy Enunwa, a fucking savage, who was absolutely humongous, right? It didn't matter what his muscle mass was significantly higher than any receiver. Brandon Marshall, another guy higher than any receiver, so any of this shit, especially with a group of outliers, I don't even know what the fuck makes sense. Look at Carl Lewis versus Ben Johnson right there. You have a guy that fails a drug test for steroids and a guy that fails a drug test for, for stimulants, right? Two completely different builds. And they respond differently to each, and it's the same sport. I just don't know where the fuck I lie with any of this stuff. To me, I've seen so many outliers along things that to have any kind of norm to me is just fucking lunacy. I don't even know.
Yeah. And then the goal isn't to try to put everybody in a box and create norms. The goal is to say, look, based on what we measure, are there any correlations to see, are there any correlations to speed, power, ability in the weight room, because they're capturing data with that too. See that we see any overlay. Is there any correlation to an increased risk for injury if you get to a certain level? Like you said with Chris, he knows that if his volume and his expectation is this, if he's bigger than this, like things are going to start creeping up and it's going to affect his ability to perform. So again, it also goes down to, it's not absolute muscle mass. Like you and I both know Brandon Marshall. We know he's a freak of nature. Like he is a specimen, but he's also a very large individual. So I don't even know if we ever measured him. He would have the frame to be able to hold that, as opposed to a slot receiver, as a Golden Tate or a Sterling Shepard. Like, yeah, they're not. You don't compare both of those guys because they're totally different types of players. Brandon's freaking nature. He had a long NFL career, very successful for himself. So it's just another tool to look at. Like, can we make better decisions based on what we have instead of, hey, throw him in the bod pod. What is he? Oh, this lineman's 28%. He's too fat. He's got to lose weight. It's like, well, is he really? Or are we just saying that he needs to lose weight because he's not that 25% or below norm?
What do the players think of the testing? Because I have a lot of the guys I work with now, they're sick to death with all the testing and measurements and getting compared here and there. How long does it take to do 30 of these tests? And what's their kind of buy-in? Do they buy into it? Do they think they like the idea of it, or how is it?
Yeah, I can knock it out without a scribe in 9 minutes or less. So it's a lot shorter than a DEXA.
Oh, shit. Okay.
I think explaining it to them in words that they understand, to say, hey, look, we're not just throwing you in a bod pod. We're not just going to put you on a DEXA. We kind of want to learn more about, what your current makeup is, how much skeletal mass you have, how much muscle mass you have. Is there the potential to grow intelligently? Obviously, we always want to make sure that, if it's a college kid, putting on muscle mass at the appropriate rate is going to be important. And some of these guys, if they come from a program where a lot of their coaches were like, yeah, you just have to get bigger. Like, it doesn't matter what it is. I want the number on the scale to look like this. So they're drinking these ridiculous shakes with canola oil and maltodextrin. You look at it and like, I just get nauseous to think like that's what these kids are being given to gain weight. It's just so horrible for them. So a kid gains a bunch of weight, and you take his shirt off, you're measuring them, and like, oh man, you're supposed to be a tight end. You look terrible. Gangly little thing. He's just kind of a string bean. I'm like, man, you weren't meant to be 260. And the guy's like, what do these measures do? It's like, well, we just want to make sure that we learn as much as we can based on what your current, genetic size is. based on skeletal mass, based on muscle mass, how much adipose mass you have. And then, can we make better decisions on training and nutrition to help you get to where the coaches think you can get, and also take into consideration what the players feel comfortable with. And a lot of times like, yeah, they made me gain 30 pounds and I gained it in like 2 months and I feel terrible. Like I wake up, my heart is beating out of my chest. I'm like, man, I can only imagine what your A1C and blood glucose looks like to having done that and getting no sleep because you just feel like complete and utter crap. So some of them kind of get it. Some of them are just like, oh, I'm here to get med, just do what you need to do. But I think the ones that ask questions and you tell them about it, they're like, man, this is kind of cool. I really want to know what I'm at. Because I know I'm not like my, receiver teammate who's just a genetic freak. Like I can never match him. And a lot of the NFL guys were always thinking that too. Like, we work with Saquon. He's a freak of nature. I mean, outlier, you want to talk about outlier, that's an outlier of outliers.
Yeah.
And everybody else in that position room, they're very competitive, which is great, but to a fault. Like you can't train the same way he does. You can't expect to be 232 pounds at, 6% body fat all year round. Like you can't do that because that's not what you're made of. So let's be a little bit smarter about you trying to chase numbers or you improving you. Do what you need to do to get better and stronger and faster at your position, and don't worry what he's doing.
Have you seen many instances of the guys? Because, I mean, we all know that in the US, you're huge proponents of a lot of weights and trying to get guys as big as possible. Have you seen a lot of instances of guys where you've said, hey, your muscle mass is too big here? I mean, we're going to have potential joint issues. Are you trying to sort of bring them down as well?
I don't think we've ever tried to bring them down because then it just kind of throws a lot more into the equation. The interesting things we see are some of those tweener guys. Like they played really well in college. I got a safety, but in the NFL, he's 215 pounds. Does he need to be 225, 230 pounds, or does he need to go a little bit lower? And when you kind of measure these guys, you see like, oh, he's got really narrow hips. He's got massive upper body biochromial measures, but he also has tiny legs too. So when he puts on mass, it's all along the larger frames that can sustain it and support it. So you have these guys that are just kind of overdeveloped upper body, underdeveloped lower body, but in their heads are like, I got to be bigger. I got to be bigger. I got to be bigger. It's like, well, how much emphasis have you put on, improving your lower body size? What kind of training have you done in the past? Is it putting you in the direction of increasing size where you need it? You don't need any more in your upper body because you're already, you need to become more resilient lower body. You need to have, whatever you need to do to train in the off season to get you maybe a little more hypertrophy, maybe tailor your diet appropriately for it. We've never taken that and tried to dial a guy back in terms of overall muscle mass.
So in regards to college recruiting, right? Like for younger kids, something like this, are you taking bone scans?
If a team's got a DEXA, then I don't know what the recruiting rules are like. So if a kid comes on a visit, what you're allowed to do with them, most places would love to do any and everything.
Yeah.
I've been on one where we had a tight end. He wasn't going to sign, but he ended up doing a Nord board. And this guy was like over 700 on both legs. I'm like, holy crap, what the hell? But in terms of what you're allowed to do nowadays, I mean, it's changed so much since I left, in 2017, like the rules are so different now. I'm not sure what you can and can't do. Yeah.
Cause I think about guys like Scottie Pippen that grow, 6-8 inches in their college career, like how even recruiting. I mean, when I was coaching in high school, like in a team setting, talking about recruiting fucking 7th and 8th graders. Now I have nothing to do with that. I want no part of that, but you're sitting there trying to project how a kid's going to be as a 7th, 8th grade running back or linebacker or lineman. And you have to invest in these kids because they're giving them scholarships. I mean, even in college, now they're offering freshmen, sophomores in high school for college scholarships. I don't know where they get the gall to do this shit. It's fucking, it's lunacy. So to make any kind of prediction with these, you have to have some kind of, you got to look at their growth plates. And even that, how is that really an indication of growth hormone secretion or any other kind of hormonal imbalance? That's, do they have a fucking tumor on the pituitary gland that's going to give them, acromegalia, what the fuck do we know?
It's tough too, because you don't know what kind of compliance you're going to get for this kid. Because, I've worked with 5 stars in the past. They come in. Yes. These guys are freaks in nature. Like, this guy's going to make it to the NFL. And after 1 year, like fizzles out, not even on the roster going into his junior year. Like, man, his brother was a rugby superstar. He had so much potential. And, you know, that's the tough thing about making a lot of bold predictions. I think the good thing is if you've got a staff in place that is, you know, you don't have a head coach carousel where somebody goes in, whole new performance staff. Now it's a whole new training regime, a whole new different way of monitoring and testing these kids, because that's another thing that just ruins the ability to develop a kid over time. Like some of these kids see different coordinators, different strength coaches, 2 to 3 over a 4-year span.
Yeah.
And everybody has different philosophies, competing philosophies. Oh, the person who was here before sucks. We got to do it completely different. It
Change
goes from
every
Olympic
fucking light
lifting
bulb
to a high intensity to, you know, everything's a pull from the ground. Man, like you said, yeah, that's why the consistency over time and being smart with what you have. And if a guy ends up blowing up, you know, 6 inches over the course of a summer, it's like, all right, now we got to reevaluate what we're going to do with this kid and be smart about what we do with him. So
you mentioned DEXA. Is a DEXA scan, is that now no longer the gold standard compared to this new technique?
There was actually a study they just published about skin folds to say all is, it was a good one, 2021. It said skin folds come back, all is forgiven. And it just looked at all the different techniques. You've got DEXA, hydrostatic weighing, BIA, skin folds, bod pod, and just looking at, you know, is it appropriate to call something a gold standard or not? And I think there's a lot of different contexts where you could say like, okay, a DEXA is good in this situation. But again, you can only, because there is radiation emitted in certain states, have a lot of different procedures about who needs to operate it, what kind of testing you could get into. Because we looked at this with the Giants, and because of Jersey's laws, it would have been like 2 years of schooling on top of getting certified as a X-ray technician. And it was like $25,000 for that process. And then the machine itself, if you get the GE Lunar IDEXA, it's like another 120 grand, and you have to have the appropriate space for it. It's got to be, you know, 3 meters away from the operation table, because, you know, you can only scan these guys maximum of 4 times per year, which I think there's a lot of good stuff you get out of a DEXA, but every methodology, including this one, has its limitations. You know, you're either going to be limited on money, budget, individual characteristics that the players are going through. So if you're on a BIA or a bod pod or a DEXA, if the guys have trained, if they have low muscle glycogen status, if they're dehydrated, it's going to influence the results. So as long as you're consistent with when you're taking it and how you're taking it, and the guys know that too, because they will try to cheat it any way possible to get a better result. And, you know, I don't blame them. That's just how it is, because sometimes people use the results negatively and they try to, you know, punish them for it. Yep. But I think, you know, DEXA is great. DEXA is really great. I hold it higher in regard than bod pod and BIA. I think skin folds are also very great. You can get a $200 pair of calipers, and if you have somebody who knows the sites and can do them consistently, I mean, you're gonna decrease that operator error. Then this is just adding in not only just skin folds too, because it's not just body fat, it's looking at circumference measures and girth. So tracking, you know, changes of a person over time to see how they are progressing too.
So I've had bioelectrical impedance, skin folds, and hydrostatic weighing done on me when I was in college. Mm-hmm. Hydrostatic weighing, I was 5% body fat. Skin folds, I was 9% body fat. And bioelectrical impedance, I was 15 to 17% body fat, depending on the day. I don't trust any of this shit. I think it's all bullshit. And I know bioelectrical impedance, what do you got to do? Chug a bunch of water a couple hours beforehand, and all of a sudden you have way more muscle mass? Right? Like how do you cheat all these things? What give us that? And which one do you think is the best right now?
Like you said, with BIA, because it uses the frequencies, the multiple frequencies that go through the body. And if you've got more body water, the frequencies go at a faster rate. If you have more body fat, which has less density than water, it's going to take more time to go through. And it's the same thing with, I mean, underwater weighing, nobody really does it anymore because you have to have a tank that's just gigantic. And it's also dependent upon the athlete or the person you're testing. If they don't submerge themselves properly, if they don't get all the air out of the lung, you're going to have that excessive residual volume, which plays into the equation too. And it's tough. They've looked at all this stuff. There was something somebody had posted where somebody did a DEXA and a bod pod. It was like a bodybuilding athlete, and they, you know, take your pre, take your post. It was at the end of the cut. The bodybuilding athlete and the DEXA went from like whatever, 9 to 5. And then the bod pod, there was still a massive difference. So like almost an 8% difference between both of the measures. It's like, holy crap, what do you do? And I think the method that you choose and the way you educate the athletes on how to do it, you want to be as consistent as possible. Because if you're doing a DEXA, I think DEXA is great. DEXA and skin folds, I probably have the most amount of confidence in. If you have somebody who is doing the same measures over and over again, explaining them how to do it, positioning them appropriately, skin folds, taking the appropriate sites, because it's hard to cheat a skin fold. If you're pinching at the exact same site every single time, you can't really necessarily cheat it. Ideally, you don't want somebody who has eaten or exercised, but that's going to influence your bod pod, BIA, or DEXA even more. And they've even published this, especially with the DEXA. If you're measuring guys after training and their muscle glycogen status is low, then it's going to elevate their fat content because they just don't have it in the scan. And that's the tough thing, because all these are indirect measures. I mean, you can't do direct measures. That's fucking cadavers. You're not going to slice and dice these guys open. Mm-hmm. And I think if you integrate it in your protocol and you have a justification for it, and not only does the staff believe it, but the players buy into it and they like seeing their numbers, they get competitive about it, or they want to use it to better themselves. I think generally if you can get that with the DEXA or you can get that with skin folds, ideally you're probably going to have a lot more success than if you're using something like you said, a bod pod or a BIA, which just elevates the number. Bod pod, I can't get behind, because the numbers that I've seen on guys, I'm like, this isn't right.
Yeah.
And now it's effing with their heads, and now it's effing with my ability to help them out. Oh, what we did over the past 8 weeks didn't work. It's like, oh, this machine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what are you relying on? What you're saying, and how do you know that, let's say these skin folds, hey, I'm actually improving the muscle mass? What are you doing as your quantifications? You're doing circumference measurements. Are you combining it with lipid panels or anything like that to see?
No, not, at this level, getting that extra data is just not feasible in terms of what you can do with them and or the amount of money that it takes to get that done. So a lot of it is just taking the information and using it to guide protocols and programming and saying like, okay, can we bring in the dietitian or nutritionist that is working with these players to say, okay, now we have a little bit better idea where so-and-so's at. We could potentially get here. Here's the plan for them. But as you know, it's all about compliance and what's going on with them and how much they buy into it and do it. So then a lot of it is, you're trying to take a big leap of faith and hoping that these players understand that what you're doing. And that just brings in the whole human element of everything that we do. We can put together the best protocols and procedures day in and day out in programming too. But if the guys don't follow through, not only doing it in the session, but also the other 22 hours of the day that they need to take care of business to be able to see these improvements and gains, then it's kind of all for naught.
That's a key point too, because I think we can have the best intentions with a lot of this stuff, but I know it can cause a lot of damage too. Like I've had one guy every day when he was getting to the rink needs to get onto the scale. And if the scale's not going down, he's not practicing. If he ain't practicing, he ain't playing. So then what we're doing, like, is just encouraging so much sort of negative behavior towards sort of nutrition and sort of all of the different health behaviors. My question for you, how much do you look at sort of looking at rewarding good behavior and trying to get people into good habits with eating? Because this to me is like the sort of the secret link to it all. I mean, you can always educate guys and you can say whatever you want, but it's not until they start to, I mean, do you look at things like positive rewarding them and sort of encouraging sort of like meaningful behavior change, or how do you look at that? How do you manage this kind of stuff?
Yeah, because behavior change is a big part of it too, because the tough thing about nutrition, as opposed to a player going to the strength coach and having a good training session, they can feel that. Like, oh yeah,
Right.
we got our butt kicked, but I feel so good. Endorphins are running throughout the body. The brain feels a little bit more clear because of increasing that brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And same thing, if a person feels like, hey, my ankle's a little bit wonky, my knee, they go to the trainer, does some manipulations, does treatment. Oh, it feels so much better. But with nutrition, it's difficult to get that immediate gratification. So that's when you kind of have to just understand the player that you're working with. Like, where is this guy's head at? Like, what is his desire to change on that, changes the stage theory? Is he just kind of thinking about, oh, I need to eat healthier, but just doesn't follow through with it? He's kind of half in, half out. I think the positive reinforcement is a very beneficial thing, and just kind of have them focus on the things and the outcomes that they want to have happen. So if you have guys that have an injury history, or they just have bad habits to where they're just always fatigued, they're always sore, they don't sleep very well, understanding what the etiology of those are and coming up with a solution for them, and then kind of communicating it to them at the level that they need, whether it's in person, showing them what they need to do, or, do they need diagrams? Do I need to text it to them? Do I need to make a freaking TikTok viral video and send it out to them? Nowadays, that's what you need to do. And then, hopefully they understand, having them regurgitate it too. It's not just telling them, because you can tell them till you're blue in the face. They'll nod their head, and then in the back of their mind, they're like, when's this motherfucker going to stop talking to me? Sure. It's like, no, is this important to you? What does it mean to you? How can I help? Well, what is it you're struggling with? And I think getting a chance to be around these athletes day in and day out, for the most part, being able to coach them on the floor, wherever they're at, you start developing that trust. So then they know that you're the person they're going to come to when they have problems, instead of always visualizing something and seeing like, hey, this person isn't doing something that they're doing something that is holding them back, and then bringing it to their attention. And again, if they don't acknowledge it, then they're not going to be the ones that are going to be compliant with it. But using other methods, like, all right, does this guy have a history of injury? Is he kind of like always on a 1-year contract and a prove it contract? And, is he doing it because his mom is sick and he's got, family problems at home, and this is all he has because he left school early, doesn't have a college degree? It's like, let me be the person to help you do these things day in and day out, or at least explain it to you and just try to hold you accountable. And then, for the most part, when guys have horrible behaviors and they start identifying and changing them, they can start, things start clicking. They start feeling better. Oh yeah, I decided to get 15 minutes, 30 minutes extra sleep. I definitely feel a lot better. That's weird. Or I usually just I don't eat at breakfast. I have like a freaking peanut butter and jelly sandwich before practice. And then you're expected to be on the field for 2 hours, and they're fatiguing, in third period. It's like, well, hey, what kind of things do you like? Let's eat this, a little bit of breakfast. Let's eat this heading into training. Oh yeah, dude, I feel so much better. And then, dose them during practice. So there's no one right way or wrong way, but I think identifying what the habits are and understanding, is this guy really ready to make a change, explaining it to him in a way that he understands, that he can verbalize it back instead of just nodding his head, and then giving him kind of checkpoints to say, okay, this is what I need you to do today, and we'll reassess tomorrow to see how you feel, and then we'll reassess the next day, and then the next day. And for the most part, and Mike, you probably experienced this too, guys that definitely do get a chance to buy in and start feeling better for the small changes that they do make, are inspired to do it because they recognize how much better they do feel. And it's like, why would you not want to feel like that anyway? Most of these guys have no clue they could feel so much better, because most athletes just aren't very healthy. Like, there's such a huge misconception about, oh, athletes are super fit. Yeah, they're super fit, but a lot aren't very healthy here, or just, body wise either.
So in regards to compliance, I mean, this is huge. The research suggests that 0.8 to 1.2 grams per pound of body weight is what's necessary to put on muscle. On top of that, right? Did I state that properly?
Yeah, per pound, yeah.
Per pound of body weight. Yeah, right. So on top of that, it's also suggesting that anything more than 30 to 50 grams of protein in a sitting for most people is going to be too much. So now you have a guy that weighs 200 pounds that wants to put on muscle, or that you need to get up to 215 or 220 and you want it to be lean body mass. And for sure this motherfucker is not carrying around a scale, weighing his food. And now he needs to eat 6 times a day. How are you going to do this? What are you telling this guy? Because I happen to believe, I don't happen to think that, obviously not all people are created equal. I have a professional athlete that's been playing for a very, very long time, who at the beginning of every season comes in around, 183, 185. At the end of every season, at the end of every off season, he leaves at about 195, 196. This motherfucker loves sugar cookies and he loves drinking wine. Mm-hmm. And his idea of having protein shakes is Smoothie King. Matter of fact, he didn't even have protein shakes for the first fucking, I don't know, 10 years of his career. So when it comes to anything like that, he's not, I know for a fact, he's not consuming 193 grams of protein every single day. I wouldn't be surprised if he's consuming something like fucking maybe 100. And then I talked to his brother that is saying he wants to gain probably 5 pounds because he's changing positions. I asked what he eats. He eats different. His brother's a little more type A with his stuff, and he's giving me his whole diet. I said, why don't you just add 1 serving of chicken every single day, knowing that his brother just puts on weight, pure muscle, doing whatever he wants, and he's putting on weight, right? Like, or 1 extra serving of meat is all it took. So knowing that these guys are fucking physiological freaks, knowing that these guys, the amount of compliance that you're going to get for these guys weighing their food and doing everything that's supposed to, and knowing how little they actually eat, most of them, like you got a Chad Ochocinco eating McDonald's 3 times a fucking day, breakfast, lunch. And that wasn't a lie.
No,
I have guys that played with them. He fucking walking with fucking chicken nuggets right before camp. So what are you doing for these guys? What are you telling them? What guidelines are you following? How are you getting any of the research to apply to these guys? I'm fucking at, when it comes to nutrition, I don't fucking know what works.
Yeah. And I think the main thing is understanding, like, you're not going to fucking save everybody. Like, that's one of the biggest things is if you come in thinking I've got to take care of everybody and everybody, so this is me. No, you're going to beat yourself over the head. You're going to hate yourself. I think the main thing is understanding, like, look, there's a lot of work a lot of these guys need to work on. It's not just nutrition. It's almost everything. But figure out what's like one thing that they could do that's going to provide the biggest ROI that they might feel comfortable with doing. So if it's like, hey, I like smoothies, I don't like eating a lot of food. And I had one player, he's bounced around the league, still in the league, and he's got signed. He was like, look, I don't like protein. I don't like eating meat. I don't like seafood. I don't like protein shakes. I don't eat eggs. And I'm like, you just eliminated every source. And in my head, I'm like, I asked him, like, well, tell me, what is it that you normally eat when you're away? Because I kind of see what he's doing when he's in and around the facility. And it's very like minimal, like bird peckish eating things. I'm like, yo, this guy's is a skill player and dropping weight. And like, we need to come up with something because the carb porn, not eating, no issue there, but he can't be losing muscle mass. He's already kind of emaciated to begin with. So I was like, well, hey, have you heard of essential amino acids? He's like, oh, what is that? I'm like, well, the body needs to get protein in because we have 10 essential amino acids that the body can't make. So once you get those in, you can potentially build all the other ones. And the best sources are animal foods, but you're not going to eat that. So we're going to push that to the side. You don't like shakes, so we're going to push that to the side. So I was like, what do you like? Well, I like these juices. I like this, this, and this. I'm like, well, here, what if I put a scoop or 2 of EAAs in a drink? Would you like to try that? He's like, yeah, I like this pressed juice. I'm like, okay. Luckily I've got like multiple flavors of the powder. So I'm like, okay, let's try this one. Mix it in. He's like, oh, this is good. I'm like, man, what are your thoughts on drinking a few of these per day? He's like, I could do that. It's like, man, okay, this is just step 1. I can't fight the battle. If he's not going to eat, he's not going to eat. And I'm not going to be on his shoulder, looking over his food saying, oh, you didn't get 8 ounces of fucking chicken breast at your meal. Like, no, he's going to say, fuck off, man. I don't want to talk to you anymore. So again, it's kind of like, what's this one thing that we can start with? And then, he does it. And now he's a little bit more inquisitive. Like, hey, did you see What the Health or whatever documentary? Like, what are your thoughts on this? Or should I go vegan? Or, I do like eating fish every now and then. Is that the right kind of protein for me? I'm like, that's a great source. So what kind of fish do you like eating? We'll complement it with your EAAs. So at least instead of getting like 20 grams in a day for a 195-pound athlete, we can at least start pushing the envelope and getting him a little bit closer to where he needs to be. And for a lot of these guys, it's, look, let me just see the one big thing that's going to provide them with the largest ROI, that it might be a little bit of their idea instead of specifically just mine. And it sucks because, again, look, you've got a PhD's worth of knowledge in the field. Hopefully I have the same. And what we do is 100% of everything that we do. And we have so much knowledge, but to those guys, it's like 5.5%. And you have 20 motherfuckers throwing all their knowledge at them every day. So we wonder, Hokumita's not listening to me. I'm like, well, you got too many fucking voices in his ear and he's super confused. He knows what you're saying the 5 minutes you're talking to him. The second somebody grabs him to pull him aside or a coach yells at him, everything's out the window. And then we have to start over from square one. So you got to understand, like you said it before, like these guys are athletes, but they're also humans too. There's a lot going on in their lives.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about in American football, but I can only imagine they've been surrounded by lunatics for a long fucking time.
Yeah.
You know, and treated like dog shit a lot of the time. So I understand also that we have to almost prove ourselves to it. But it's definitely a hard job looking at nutrition, because I know a lot of guys that, you know, if they're feeling very anxious or something unexpected happens, they turn a lot to comfort food, you know, and then, you know, you can very quickly, and I mean, I've dealt with athletes with eating disorders too, especially when there's like weight classes and stuff. So there's a huge psychological component to all of this, and it's really complicated. I mean, you can probably have the best validated, backed up plan, strategy that you might be following for a long old time, and it just gets thrown out the window because something pops up, unfortunately. So I would love to ask you, what do you think about the whole carnivore trend right now? What's your educated opinion on that?
Yeah, I think, you know, if you asked me this 10 years ago, I would have given you this very fixed mindset answer of, you know, the shit that we learned in the textbooks. But having seen a lot of different things, and, you know, anecdotally, not a lot has been published, peer reviewed over it. So it's hard to just jump on and give it full force. But I think for a lot of people that struggle, which the majority of the world is just in terrible health, and we know this for a variety of reasons. They're just over consuming hyper palatable foods. They're not exercising. Like, people are just horrible with their habits. So there's a lot of issues going on that the standard guidelines can't fix. So you have to individualize everybody's situation. Same thing, I individualize every athlete I work with, their situation, because they're all going through different things. They're training at different times. They have different goals. A lot of different stresses going on in the backgrounds. Their, you know, blood work is very different. I think there's a lot to it. I mean, I'm a huge proponent of eating meat. Like, there's a lot of benefits to eating good quality meat.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for athletes, I wouldn't recommend just completely skimping out on what's going to help you bioenergetically, especially during specific times of the year. And we know this. We see athletes that go keto or eliminate carbs, and they try to go into a training camp or in competitive phases, and they just crash because the energy demands are too much. They're not holding weight. It's not helping them mitigate inflammatory responses, and they need quick energy. If you're a team sport athlete, you need muscle glycogen. You just do. Now, it needs to be strategically periodized throughout the day, and you can't just eat sugar and drink juice all day to meet your carb demands, because then, I mean, your blood glucose levels are going to be shot. And I've dealt with guys that are like 10% body fat, 9% body fat, that have elevated A1Cs, which blows my mind, but again, not surprising. And it doesn't scare me, but it saddens me a little bit too. But I think there's a way to do it intelligently that, depending on what your health status and situation is, like, especially if you have autoimmune diseases, I think specific things like keto and carnivore can be huge.
Right.
If you've got a lot going on, then there's a lot of benefits of, you know, improving blood glucose response and insulin sensitivity and decreasing inflammation. But I think the thing is, people go from eating a carnivorous type diet, or not an omnivorous type diet, but the carbohydrates or their other choices that they include are still very ultra processed and hyper palatable, to just completely switching over and following a detailed plan that says, hey, you got to eliminate alcohol, you got to eliminate grains, you got to eliminate, you know, excess and added sugars and X, Y, and Z, to where the issues that were causing the problem aren't there anymore. So they see benefits, but being just keto or carnivore long term, in the absence of a chronic disease, now we're start seeing a lot of anecdotal evidence of people like, man, now I'm kind of effed up because I'm missing out on these other things, these other micronutrients that the body needs to make. And you can get them from a variety of sources. If you do nose to tail, or you eat liver, or you whatever supplement, that's going to be an important part of it too. So I think I'm very open-minded, but, you know, it depends on the person and their situation. Would I recommend it for an athlete sans any issues or major problems? Probably not, but you know, if they're at the tail end of their career, they just retired, and like, yeah, you know, test all you want, see what happens, you know, go crazy.
Sure. I wasn't sure I mean, because I also know people that say they feel great from it, and I wasn't sure if it's just purely the elimination aspect of it, or was it just also the actual, just a higher protein content? Because I've read all the same studies and got taught too, like you can only absorb a certain amount of protein and, you know, per hour and different things like this. So, I mean, also these guys that eat, what's his name, Mike? The big guy from the doctor. What's his name?
Sean Baker, I think. His
Sean
name is.
Baker.
Right. And he eats like 6 pounds of tri-tip or something like that. And I mean, what happens to the body? I mean, so say like you're consuming that much protein, that must almost throw some of the old research out the door, no? Like, because if you can only sort of digest a certain amount per hour, where's the rest of the protein kind of going?
Yeah, and I think I think it was either an ISN publication, ISSN, that said, and I don't know, and again, some of the stuff that people are saying could actually be contradictory to this, but generally per feeding, ideally you would want to get to the upper threshold of 0.55 grams of protein per kilogram. Right. So, and which could be, I mean, for a large athlete, that's like 60 to 70 grams, which is a good amount. So, and again, it depends on how many feedings you're going to get in per day. So when they say like, oh, you need 20 or 30 grams per feeding, like, dude, if I have a lineman and he's a shithead and he's like, I'm only going to eat 3 times per day, I'm like, he needs up to 100 grams per feeding. And there was another study they looked at, I think it was bodybuilders, and it was a longitudinal one where they looked at up to 4.4 grams per kilo. So 2 grams per pound body weight, which, I mean, that's a lot of protein for anybody really. And there was no negative effect over the course of a year or 2 years. And they found that the increase in protein as opposed to increase in fat and carb calories added to increases in lean body mass and didn't negatively affect fat mass too. So there's a lot that goes into it because of just how when protein gets broken down, and if you don't necessarily need it to complement the amino acid pool, well, does it just go to the liver and gets converted to gluconeogenesis? So if you are on a low carbohydrate diet, you could still survive because you have mechanisms in the body that are still able to create glucose. And whenever it says, oh, it's zero sugar, zero sodium, the body still runs on glucose in some form or another. It's ketones, it's glucose. However the body wants to get there, it's going to end up adapting over time. And I think to your point, when you said that when people switch over, especially like some of these older individuals, that they are eliminating the things from their diet that weren't helping them at all, that were pretty much holding them back and just messing up their overall health. And a lot of older populations aren't necessarily getting the amount of protein that they want, because that 0.8 per gram kilogram RDA is ridiculous. I had a Twitter post about this, and people were like, well, that's just the minimum amount to, prevent muscle wasting and sarcopenia. I'm like, was that what you want to recommend to people who already have a horrible diet when they think that that's the max? I'm like, I haven't eaten that low, outside of being hungover all day and just couldn't eat anything, because there's no benefit to it. So when they start eating more protein, I mean, obviously from an immunity factor, from a muscle mass factor, as you get older, that threshold to stimulate muscle protein synthesis for leucine actually doubles too. So you have older populations that are already eating enough protein, they're not doing any weight-bearing exercises, and it's kind of a double negative, who have higher requirements too. So when they start eating more, I mean, obviously they start feeling a lot better. So there's a lot of benefits to that too.
So I went fully carnivore for 100 days and I fucking loved it. The only downside of it was I just stunk to high hell. Like my armpits stunk. It was so bad, but I absolutely loved it. Now, one thing that I noticed, and Sean Baker talks about this, is you don't have to shit as much. And that's because of the bioavailability of meat. Now, I know that when I eat mozzarella, I fucking love it. Like I'll eat 1.5 pounds. I have a serious fucking cheese problem. Like I really do. I know I have a problem. I've admitted it. But when I eat it, I won't shit for an entire day. And if that's all I eat all day, it might be longer than that. But that's because in my thought process, anecdotally, like I've thought about this, 100% bioavailability. I am using virtually every aspect of that cheese and every aspect of that protein of the steak. And that's why you don't shit as much. It's not as bulky. Now, if that's the case, if you're using everything, Well, you're not using it right away. It's taking a while for it to pass through your system because it's taking a while for you to digest it. So even though we can only absorb, I weigh 93 kilograms. I just did the math. That's 51 grams of protein by the 0.55 formula you just gave. 51 grams of protein per meal. And maybe that's every 2-3 hours, right? But I only ate twice a day when I was doing carnivore. Once, twice a day. I'd have, pound of ground beef with some bacon and some fucking eggs for one meal. And then, I don't know, maybe a 20-ounce steak for another meal. That's all I would eat all day. And I kept losing weight. I was eating a fuck ton, but I barely shit. And I still put on muscle. I was getting cut. My arms were looking fucking bigger. I was bigger. I felt better. So I was still able to put on the muscle with minimal working out and all this. And my thought process was, well, maybe my body's just taking its time digesting this shit, because if it was not digested, if it was not utilized protein, I just shit it right out. That's what happens with all the fiber. You don't use it, so you shit it out. That's why you take Metamucil 24 hours later, it's gone. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think in terms of digestion, protein does take a little bit longer to digest. That's why people get that satiety feeling. It's important for not only people that are trying to lose weight, but just athletes in general, because of being able to break it down and have it available for the amino acid pool. It's not automatic. It's going to take a few hours for that to happen to when you dose again, but you're only eating twice a day. And that's why the interesting thing is when they came up with the 0.55, it's like, what about these people that are having 75 to 100 gram protein meals? And, some of it goes to the amino acid pool. Some of it gets deaminated. You kind of lose a little bit in urine too. And that's why they say, again, the people that say, oh, well, protein's bad for your kidneys because the kidneys have to process it and it goes out in urine. I'm like, well, elevated blood glucose over time is even worse because that's toxic. So let's just start there. But then the fact that if it is needed for gluconeogenesis in absence of carbohydrates, like how important is that excess amount of protein for you too? If it's not getting lost through urine and you're not pooping it out, and you've already basically built up your amino acid profile, and you're in positive nitrogen balance, where does the rest of it go? It's used for energy very minimally. Like it's an inefficient source of energy, and we all know that too. I think some of it just stays in the body to assist with the gluconeogenesis too.
So one of the ability to partition macro and micronutrients, right? It's very unique based on there are freaks of nature, right? Like you see this, like the Chad Ochocinco's, and I got exposed to this. It never dawned on me that people just assimilate macros differently. Like that didn't dawn on me. For the guy that has 10% body fat but still has elevated glucose, A1C levels, right? Like that to me, I never thought that was possible when I was growing up. Because I got really interested in nutrition. I started researching into it probably like my freshman, sophomore year of college. Like I was diving deep into it, and all, they were all telling you to go vegan at that time. Like it was all vegetarianism at that time. It's such that's why I fucking don't read nutrition books, because it's all biased shit. But not all. That was a broad statement. But I was sitting down. I was at DeFranco's. I was a freshman in college, and I weighed all my food. I did isocaloric meals. I was like a 40-30-30 guy, like zone diet. Everything was fucking perfect. I made sure everything was spot on. And I'm talking to one of these kids that's absolutely jacked out of his fucking mind. And he's talking about he had Wendy's before this. He's going to go and have McDonald's after that. And I looked at him and said, how the fuck do you do that? And he looked at me and says, Mike, what don't you get? I'm not white. Right. So I said, fuck me. Like now here I go. So how do you account for that type of genetics? Like what are you, it's just like my guy that eats the sugar cookies and wine. He's still going to be 193, 196. Mm-hmm. How do you account for that? I don't, how do you comprehend any of this?
It's tough because like we see these athletes all the time. They, especially at the college level, they eat horribly. They're on horrible sleep cycles, and they just keep putting on mass, and they look like they could do a physique show and probably win. And to me, it's like, what is it that's different about them? Obviously, we can always say genetics, but within their coded DNA, is it specifically that, or is it, epigenetic in their environment? Is it that, some people are just better off, they've got a better microbiome, their body responds better to training, they just happen to not stress as much, they manage stress a lot better, their internal environment is just functioning at a higher level to whatever they eat, whether it's good or bad, just gets broken down and utilized in a better fashion than somebody who eats a lot better and is meticulous like you were about everything that they're doing and lifting and training, but still can't make the same kind of gain. So, I mean, I really don't necessarily have an answer to that. I kind of just look at the player up and down and just ask them a lot of different questions about, what's going on with everything that you're doing. And even the ones that aren't doing most of the things right are the ones that are still the outliers and making all this progress. And I mean, that's the $1 million question. If somebody can hammer that down or harness it in a bottle or a pill and sell it to everybody else, I mean, you're going to change the world.
No. Fuck, thanks for nothing.
It's just like looking at sports performance globally. I mean, there's so many different components, and we like to think that one section could really be the answer to such a huge thing, but we ain't got really a clue, eh? I mean, if we're really honest about it, we ain't got a clue.
Like, we've got multi-million-dollar software companies and teams investing in all this and all that, but the incidents of soft tissue injury are still going through the roof, and nobody has an answer to it. It's like, what are we doing?
Yeah, and now it's changed from, muscle tears to tendon tears.
Yeah.
You have Achilles and patellar tendon tears. You didn't have those unless you were 40 fucking years old playing tennis.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, that never happened. I remember learning that if you tore your Achilles, it was due to a serious mineral deficiency. I learned that in fucking high school and college. Like, that's what someone told me. And now I see them. You see them every year.
Yeah.
It's fucking wild. So, like, the fuck do we know about anything?
We don't know what we don't even know.
That's right. You don't know what you don't know, which is a lot.
So now, are you doing private nutrition counseling? So if someone hit you up on Instagram and was like, yo, I'm fucking fat, or yo, I want to get jacked, do you do private counseling for them?
I do. So most of the people that I've been working with have hit me up on Instagram or Twitter, still in the process of putting together, a website and all that other stuff. But yeah, again, it just, setting up a phone call to learn more about that person to see, like, is this a good fit? Can I provide value to you based on what I offer and what your goals are? Hopefully someone's like not trying to lose 30 pounds in 20 days and get ready for this event. I'm like, that's not necessarily how I work.
Yeah. So how can they find you?
They can find me on Twitter or Instagram. My handle's at Pratik X Patel. Pretty active on both sites, both mediums.
Okay. And what do you plan to do next?
That's a good question, and one that I'm still trying to figure out. But, I think I've been fortunate to have a very unique career and opportunities in sport, which I've learned a good amount, which I'm still constantly learning, but they've been very great positions that have let me see and do things that some of the other people in the field might not have experienced. So I think a lot of it too is just, I don't want to just do something for the sake of it. Like, I want to provide value. I want to just help and serve other people. So whether it's people that want to get healthier, whether it's athletes, whether it's non-athletes, but also being able to share that information to a larger population that doesn't have access to it, whether you're a high school coach or you're a small college coach who wants some resources for your athletes, but just they don't have the budget to hire somebody to do it. But you can, take some continuing ed, buy an ebook, to be able to pretty much put resources out there for others to be able to get some value from.
Brooker, what else you got for this man?
I'm all good.
So I have 10 more fucking questions that I want to ask you. So we got to have you on again, because I've already had you on for fucking an hour 15. So we've taken up enough of your time. We're absolutely having a round 2 with you.
Let's go.
Dude, I was so fucking pumped to have you on. This is a great episode. We really appreciate your time, brother.
No,
this
man,
is
I'm
honestly
glad,
one of the first proper nutrition ones we've done.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was
Right?
just me fucking arguing about anthropometrics the whole fucking time. They got nothing.
I love
out of
it. I
this.
mean, because look, it's a big part of everything that we do. Not everybody has one answer, but the goal is to try to come up with, different thought processes and methodologies based on our experiences to be able to test it out too. And that's what the whole PhD is about. Is this worth a shit or not? And if it's not, then in 4 years, I'm going to punch myself in the face.
Yeah.
But if it goes the other way and it can provide value to coaches and practitioners and teams to just be smarter about, hey, let's really take care of this athlete and get the best potential out of him instead of, put more weight on, have him gain fucking 40 pounds and there goes his knee, ACL, whatever, which happens all too often. I think, that's definitely one of the goals too.
Right on.
Sounds good, man. Thank you so much, Pratik. Huh?
Thanks for having me on, guys.